crisis. Now, human rights activists want the conversation on loss and damage fronted as President William Ruto, during his opening remarks, cautioned against the North versus the South debate. My colleague Purity Museu had this conversation with Irũngũ Houghton. Let's listen in.
Now, the African Climate Summit continues right here at the KICC, and this time round, the conversation is not about the compensation for the affected nations, but how Africa can be at the front line in the decarbonization of the globe. And now joining me is just Houston Irungu, the Executive Director at the Amnesty, and we want to have a conversation on how climate crisis affects human rights and how this can be addressed during the summit. Thank you so much, sir, for making time for us. First, let's begin by what, as an activist, as a human rights activist, what this summit really means to people like you and other people whose rights have been violated.
As Amnesty International, we know that there are no human rights on a dead planet. It is the planet that generates the life that all 8 billion people require. So, if you're talking about the right to food, if you're talking about the right to essential services, water, energy, and so on, you have to be talking about the issues of climate justice. So as Amnesty International, we are very clear that our work to protect people has to be based on a sustainable planet. We have seen millions of people, essentially climate refugees, leaving the continent, essentially because their livelihood systems have collapsed. We've seen something like 1 in 2 people not have adequate electricity or energy sources. And many of the conflicts that we're seeing in Africa now are related to the extraction of very important minerals like cobalt that we use for our phones, or like uranium, or even gold and diamonds. So I think we need to be clear that displacement as a result of exploitative mining is also a human rights violation driver. And that's why, as Amnesty International, we are here at the Africa Summit.
Absolutely. And what you're saying is that this is not just a planet problem, but a human rights problem. So as they begin the conversations on how to address this, what are some of the conversations do you expect throughout the week?
Yeah, we're concentrating a lot on how do we reduce the number of countries that are using, or economies that are using fossil fuels. Because that is what is actually warming up the planet. So we have to demand, particularly from the global north, that they deindustrialize those industries that are essentially built on, sustainably unhelpful and dangerous processes. And for example, coal is one of them. I think the other thing we've been talking about is the need to increase loss and damage financing. We know that we need, upwards of trillions of resources to be able to, of dollars to be able to respond to the changes within the climate. But unfortunately, we are just seeing a few billion dollars brought to Africa to be able to adapt to this consideration. So climate financing is very important, but much more important is climate behavioral change.
Yeah. And we've seen and heard what the UN representative has said regarding to this commitment, the over 1 billion commitment on loss and damage. It's yet to be paid since 2009. And the president has also said that it's time that we shifted our conversation from loss and damage from North and South to what Africa can do. Apart from that, maybe how best can human rights issues now moving forward be addressed as a continent?
Yeah. It is important that Africa remains proactive, that it becomes demanding on the international community, and therefore, looking at, for example, reforestation. It's so important within Kenya, for example, that we restore the ban on logging, because we had actually made some progress on this. But as we speak now, we've essentially lifted that ban, and despite a court order, we are seeing people going into forests and logging our forests. And I think that's why we need to have zero tolerance for that. I think it's really important that countries like Kenya that invested so much in renewable energy, we have a very green economy comparatively to many other countries, that we continue to emphasize both solar and wind power as a way of responding to the global crisis. But I think we need to be very careful of the argument that somehow Africa should be the carbon sink, should be the carbon market for others, because I think the danger is that they will continue, the global north will continue to use, I guess what you'd call climate destroying technology, and then somehow we in the south will be asked to take over the responsibility for that. I think we have to be very careful that this is another form of colonization.
Yeah. And do you think it's a problem of awareness when it comes to human rights issues that are as a result of climate change, or why isn't enough being done to ensure that human rights are protected in regards to climate crisis that the world is witnessing?
Yeah. So there may be a few climate denialists out there now, but I think everybody who really has figured this out knows that actually we face a climate emergency, and therefore we have to move quicker and more deeper in terms of some of the decisions and some of the agreements that have been reached over the last 10 to 15 years. As we move towards the Dubai COP, the Conference of Parties, we do need to see a breakthrough and much more sustained kind of emphasis. Otherwise, we will really not be able to deal with the climate refugees that this is creating, the conflicts we are seeing in pastoral and semi-arid areas. We will not see, large numbers of people lifted out of the darkness that they have. Here in Kenya, for example, we saw the dangers of an unsustainable energy use. Despite our investment in green energy, we saw the whole country plunged into darkness for over 12 hours. And we're also just waiting for El Nino to break. So we need to think a little bit more seriously about what does it mean to live in a climate fragile environment, and particularly what it means for people in Kenya. I think 1 in 4 of us just don't get enough to eat. Our systems are collapsing, and therefore we must see this as an emergency.
Yeah. And in Kenya, is there any legal requirement or provision? Can a Kenyan move to court probably as a result of an impact from climate change?
Absolutely. I mean, I think we should see much more public interest litigation in this area. We need to see communities demanding, for example, that the logging that is now happening, that should come to an end. We need to see, for all those, climate unsustainable practices, that they are brought to an end. And some of that will need litigation because, unfortunately, there are too many interests involved in retaining old, outmoded ways of industry. So I think we have to see that going forward.
All right, thank you so much, and all the best in the deliberations, sir.
Thank you very much, Tracy.
All right, and we've been speaking with Houghton Irungu, the Executive Director at the Amnesty, just discussing matters, human rights, and how climate change is affecting human rights globally. And so he's also looking forward to having a conversation on litigation and compensation for people that have been affected by the climate crisis. And of course, during the sessions, we will also be having other conversations such as renewable energy and carbon credits continue. Therefore, we shall be monitoring this for you and bringing you a coverage on what will be said, and most importantly, the resolutions are moving forward. I'm Purity Musianzuki.
Thank you, Purity, for that. And yes, indeed, the conversation continues. Coverage, the only way you can get it, right here on KTN News. But now, let's take a short commercial break. We will be right back with much more.